Hello, Internet. I am Corion, your witch in residence here on YouTube. And today I am deeply honored to have Father Nathan Monk join us. He's the writer of many books. He's an advocate for general human rights, really. And I was very pleasantly surprised reading through his information to find out that, we have a lot of the same views on spirituality, just looked at through a couple of different lenses. So, without further ado, hi, Nathan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. So, um, if you wouldn't mind giving our audience a little bit of a background on yourself, and we'll dive in.
Well, at least as far as the spiritual background is concerned, I'm a Southerner to begin with. I was born in Louisiana. I was raised in and around Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up uh, sort of bouncing around evangelical churches. My father has roots in the Baptist church. Was ordained in the Baptist church. Served as a minister of music for many years, and that was sort of I guess my early formation time was sort of in those Baptist roots, and then I we went to a Pentecostal church for a number of years, and it was one of the really hip Pentecostal churches, not one of the wearing the head coverings and all that kinds of stuff. It was the lights and the sound and the music, and but
The
but
the,
still
the
all of
priest
that.
played a guitar kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, all of those types of things, and so I did that, got involved in like the True Love Waits movement, those types of things in my teenage years, and that is when I sort of took a quick sidestep back into the Baptist church because I was just sort of on this spiritual journey trying to figure out where I fit, and once I turned 18, I really started to kind of question all of that. And really, I think the question that I was asking myself at that time is, in Protestantism, everything sort of dates back to, this very angry monk with gastrointestinal issues who decided to, put his 95 problems and a bitch ant one on the door in Wittenberg, and then uh, throw a temper tantrum. And that's the beginning of the origin for many Protestant people, and especially as kids. Like, we grow up and we're like, Christianity was born, just a couple of hundred years ago, and I was missing that ancientness component to it, which ultimately led me into the Orthodox Church and into the priesthood.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. I find that a connection to tradition helps kind of make binding sense of the message that we're trying to put forward.
Right.
Which, to me, the message is, try to be nice to each other, even though sometimes people are going to be jerks to us. And, that, I think, message is universal to all faiths. The only difference comes down to cultural connections to it, right?
Right.
How does one be nice if in that way, right? So, for example, we have the beatitudes in Christianity.
Sure.
We have the rights of guest and host in Norse paganism, right? That, those concepts are all trying to say the same thing, but just do it through a different cultural perspective.
Well, for sure, because I was actually talking about this with my children the other day because they asked me if I think religion is still valuable, right? And when you look at the origin of religion, um, there's sort of two components to that, right? There is the original scientific component of religion, which is that at some point human beings went out into the world, and they said, well, I care about my children. I make sure that they have a shelter, they have food, water, fire, whatever, right? Well, all of those things are supplied to me in some way. So if I am a parent who genuinely cares about my children and I'm supplying them with that, then maybe somewhere out there, there's some bigger parent that is supplying me with this earth and this food and, et cetera, right? And so even if you read things like Levitical law, there's elements of it, obviously, that we can look at now and go, ooh, but there's other components to it, right? Like prohibitions on eating shellfish, which is one of the most common allergens,
Right.
or not to eat pork, which people didn't know how to properly prepare pork at that time. And so you can see human beings trying desperately to use this what they didn't know was a scientific method, and do that. But then there's the religion as governance side of it,
Right.
right? And that's when someone comes in and goes, uh, well, God said we don't eat pork and we don't eat shellfish, but he also said you can't sleep with my wife, right? And
Right.
everyone went, what the fuck are you talking about? We've all been doing this for the whole time. He's like, oh no, no, I went up on the mountain and God spoke to me. And they're like, why didn't God speak to all of them? Oh, I'm the special one. I don't
Yeah.
know why.
Yeah.
I know I got some problems, but I'm the special one. Well, then can we go up to the mountain? No, he said, you can't go up the mountain. Like that sort of thing. And
Right.
then now we've got a leader. And now that we've got the leader, he gets to tell everyone. And so I don't know that religion, if we say religion is bad, which you hear a lot, I don't know that religion is bad. I think religion in some ways was the original attempt at science, and science isn't bad. Science is constantly growing, evolving, learning, etc., right? Because you also have people like Peter who then later come along and they go, hey, the whole not eating those foods thing, I think maybe we figured it out now.
Right.
I think we figured out how to make that work, because the Gentiles have been eating it this whole time. They figured it out, and so I
Right.
think we can do that now, right? And so it's a constant evolution. The difference is then Peter comes along and smites Ananias and Sapphira because he's now the one person who can talk to God. And so I think it's the religion as governance, not religion as us trying to figure out our relationship with the divine, whatever we see that as, that's
Yeah.
really become the problem.
Yeah, it's more of a religion as bureaucracy is the issue,
Right.
because let's be honest, no one likes bureaucracy,
No.
right? But religion is a spiritual practice. The way I've liked to try to explain it to others is, if you imagine that there is a valley between man and enlightenment, and we're all trying to build a bridge across. Each religion just has a slightly different way of doing it. For example, Christianity, or most of the Abrahamic religions, really basically say they have one guy in front that says, look, I know how to build this bridge. You guys just follow these instructions and we will get you there. Right.
Right.
Um, Other religions are like, listen, you have to use the most perfect specific wood. I'm teaching you how to use that wood, and then you go ahead and do it. And I mean, Wicca basically just says, look, here's a picture book of various bridges. Here's a whole pile of supplies. I'm over here if you need a hand, right? And
Right.
go and go and enjoy, right? But it's all still trying to do that same thing, right? We're all still trying to figure out the best path towards enlightenment, and sometimes that requires orders, and sometimes that requires a little bit more freeform. And the goal is still the same, right? Like the end result is we're all trying to make that spiritual connection. It's just how we go about it changes for the individual. At least that's how I've been viewing it, right?
Well, and not just the individual, but like you mentioned, throughout culture, right? I
Right.
mean, if you look at just early debates between the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church of, statues are idolatry, icons aren't, and they get into this, a massive fight
Right.
over this that then gets picked up by Protestantism and the iconoclast movement, where they literally went around in the early days and were smashing all the statues because they were just myopically looking at this one interpretation of have no graven images, forgetting that, you know, Moses lifted up a staff with a serpent on it so that people could be healed from being bit by the snakes, or that the Ark of the Covenant had very specific, you know, descriptions of the cherubim that would be on top, and all the, you know,
Oh yeah.
there wasn't a total prohibition on imagery. There are frescoes in old temples.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, culture plays a huge part. And sometimes I think the greatest problem that we make in society, at least in modernity, as modernity has turned into antiquity over and over again, but the problem at each stage of modernity that we make is that we try and uh, put some of these old texts as if they are still applicable today, instead of contextualizing them and saying, now that we understand this and why our elders did it this way, now knowing
Mhm.
all that we know now, maybe we should do it a little bit different this way. And we want to stay stuck uh, in the ancientness. And the ancientness has beauty. Liturgy has
Right.
beauty. Chant has beauty. Um, but I don't think that they meant for us to become a noose. Uh, I think they were trying to give us wings.
Yeah, I think that that connection is important, but that connection in a practical sense, right? Like we can see how, we as a species have evolved, right? I mean, when we all decided to, settle down and think, hey, farming is a pretty good idea, it
Right.
gave us more time. It doesn't mean we should stick to, the tradition of running around continuously ambushing bears in the woods with sticks, right? We have that opportunity to grow as people, and so our spiritual path should grow as well, should carry on the traditions that we put forward.
I think traditions are beautiful. I have this argument a lot uh, with, people that are deconstructing out of the evangelical church, right? And they're like,
Right.
tradition is bad. I'm like, well, I understand why you feel that way, but
Right.
I would you say that the Native American people who are trying to hold on to their language, you think
Right.
that's bad? You think that them trying to preserve beadwork and all of these important things that are integral to their culture, we can't, we have to kind of evaluate, and I think that's really what we're in a season of right now, post the election, is moving into a season of evaluating some of our language and what we've said and how we've said it. Um, because we can't both say cultural appropriation is wrong and say culture in and of itself is wrong, right? Because
Right.
and I think conversely, I think that's what is happening, and why we're seeing this shift is, we're seeing this shift to the right because um, there's this idea that they're going to preserve an American culture, and what they really mean is that they want to preserve an their grotesque misinterpretation of an Anglo culture,
Right.
right? And so
And
that's
that's not to necessarily say that there aren't values in that American tradition of, say, hard work, of striving for excellence, that shouldn't be preserved, because they absolutely should. But at the same time, we have advantages that the founding fathers wouldn't have had now, that we shouldn't be afraid to take advantage of, to make our lives slightly better. Because if part of that tradition is the pursuit of happiness, having the time to pursue happiness should also be a part of it. And taking advantage of those advances that we've made is not a bad thing.
right. Well, and I think that is where in lies the problem that we're facing in today's culture, is that when they said the right to pursue happiness, when that was originally written, that was written for one very specific group of people, and where the anger is coming in now, and why we are seeing a rise in right-wing fascism, as a spiritual movement, by the way,
Right.
uh, is uh, is happening specifically because they are angry that the tap has been opened in any way, shape, or form for someone else other than them. Because
Yeah.
they're like, well, then the water will run out and I won't have any. as if we don't have more than the whole rest of the world combined times three.
Yeah, we kind of have a joke up here that we use as love and those sort of things are not pie. There's not a limited
Mm-hmm.
amount of them, right? Compassion is not pie. You don't run out of compassion. You don't run out of empathy. If needed, you gain more, right? It's something that's
Absolutely.
capable of having, right?
Well, that's a concept as a polyamorous person that I understand profoundly. That people are like, oh, well, you'll stop loving. I mean, my parents, between the two of them, have six children, and I don't think like when the sixth one came along, they were like, oh fuck,
Yeah.
ran out of love.
Now we got to love the first one a little less, right? Like,
Right, it just doesn't work that way. It
no.
maybe made food division a little more complicated, but other than that,
Right. Actually
this
dividing the pie is a little more of a challenge, but
dividing the pie was more of a challenge. Sometimes you had to end up with two pies,
there
but
you go.
but that's what they did though, is they just made two pies. And I think
That's it.
that's what we've lost, is that it is like the old saying, don't build a higher fence, build a bigger table.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that somehow we lost that argument,
Yeah.
and we've got to learn how to reframe the conversation, to radically draw people in, to remind them that love matters in this.
Well, that's a lot of what I try to do with this channel is, put that out there that, we all care about the same stuff. We should the biggest way to win as a society is to get together and talk and communicate, because the more we communicate, the more we talk, the more we learn about others, the more difficult it is to divide us as a people. And I think that division is probably the greatest enemy, right? In craft, we tend to say that the biggest enemies are fear and doubt,
Mm.
because the fear will prevent you from taking the risks, and the doubt that you can do it will hold you back when you could be doing something great. And I think ultimately having that fear of your neighbor is what allows divisive rhetoric to occur. But knowing them and making your own decisions about them as a person is vitally important, right? If
Sure.
we give each other enough time, we can probably develop compassion on both sides. And while there is that sort of situation now these days of the paradox of tolerance that is coming up, that we have to sort of sit down and say, okay, where is my line? Which is totally reasonable. There are a lot of people out there that I think we can still, as a society, try to get along with, right? I think the world is fairly divided right now, but I don't think it has to be as divided as it is. And I think a strong middle ground is ultimately what defeats the radicalization of people.
An example of this is, I read somewhere that the number one thing that was Googled on election day was, did Joe Biden drop out of the race?
Right?
And what that means is that there were quite literally millions of Americans that didn't know that Biden had dropped out, that did not know that somebody else had stepped in. They had no idea that Miss Harris was the candidate. They didn't know. And so I'm
Right.
imagining in my mind, I'm making this up, but based on that data, I'm imagining in my mind that there were, literally millions of people standing in voting booths, pulling out their phones, confused as hell. So if we can look at that, and we can become frustrated because we're
Right.
aware and we're paying attention, we can become frustrated with the people on our side. We can find compassion then if we could look at those people and go, they just didn't know. Then
Right.
that means that there are a lot of people who voted for the other guy that really did just vote about the price of eggs, and they have no idea about Project 2025. They have no idea about the mass deportation. That may sound like, how is that possible? But if
Right.
if it is true that our side didn't even know who was on the ticket, then it is very possible. And the reason I mention that is to say, are we going to be able to get the hardest right wing people to have compassion? No, I think they're going to have to see a lot of destruction before they
Right.
begin to weep about what they've done. But what I am saying is that those people who really did, as inexplicable as it sounds, vote over the price of eggs. Um, I think we can maybe call them in. Now, I do want to say that I think that that responsibility falls on people that look like you and me,
Right.
right? Because I think that the hurt that exists in marginalized communities uh, is so deep that asking of them to be the ones to do that work. That's why I've been doing as much as I can since the election to call people out, not
Right.
calling them out in a mean way, but say, listen, suburban white folks, I need you. Okay, you take your week, eat your ice cream in your little puddle of your own mess, watch, Bridget Jones's Diary, have your sad moment. I get it. There's a lot at stake here. Do that. Live in that misery. But next week we got to dust ourselves off, and we got to start having arguments in the grocery store line.
Yeah.
We got to
And
start standing
like,
up. Like it's important, and not
and
me.
it's not an argument of fighting. It's an argument
Mm,
of, guys, let's try to get on the same page, right? Let's build a consensus that we can both live with. Because at the end of the day, we're all living in the same area. We should all agree on some fundamental basics, like, women should, I think we can all agree, women should be free to determine what they want to do with their bodies, right? You
should
know,
be
it,
logical.
right. I think we can all agree that people should be able to go to work and be able to work without being afraid of, being chased off because of stuff they do not at work, right? I think we can all agree on that, right? I think we can all agree that the guy who, picks my avocados, well, maybe not necessarily needs to make the same amount of money as me, definitely deserves the same respect as a human being, right? You know, those sort of pieces, I think we can all sit down and go, okay, let's work on that. And let's make sure that the people that are representing us understand that that's values we all share.
Absolutely, and I do think it's important. I had this argument a couple of years ago of I think when we talk about loving people, the image that gets stuck in people's mind is like a Mr. Rogers, right?
Right.
Like somebody talking very soft and very calm, like we are talking
Right.
now, isn't using cuss words, whatever. That is a type of love. And I think we would all agree that if tomorrow I went to my neighbor's house with a hatchet and knocked down his door, that would be violent.
Right.
If my neighbor's house was on fire and I knocked down his door with a hatchet, I would be considered a hero. And so sometimes, these difficult conversations will become heated because the house
Right.
is on fire, right? And
Right.
so,
And
there
oh,
is going to, like, we have to learn how to contextualize those things. It can't
right.
always be sweet, but it's always still love.
Exactly. Right. I mean, by all means, like, have passion, right? Passionately argue for what you believe in, by all means, but you can still have passion and respect for the other person. And I think that's something we're losing as a society, and that's sad, right?
I don't know that we ever had it, right? I think, I mean, you know, um, I don't know that we ever had it. I think that we had facades of it. I think that a lot of us, again, who look like you and me, um, we could look back at the 1950s and go, people were so much more
Oh no, I,
respectful
I
and
don't
Leave It
think
to
that's the
Beaver,
case at all.
yeah, but then you look at it and you're like, well, that's because their disrespect wasn't being announced to the world. And so I don't know that we've lost something as much as the internet has put a glaring microscope on how
Right.
mean we are to each other. Now, where I will maybe correct myself in this is I do also think that bad actors who run those algorithms and run those machines have come in like we are boiling frogs, and turned the temperature up, and our
Just
anger
slowly.
and our
Yeah.
resentment has gotten worse and worse. And that's where we can find compassion for people, right? Is we could say, how is it possible that our neighbor never knew? And they said they were voting for the price of eggs. How did they never know that all this other stuff was happening? Because the ones that they knew, they could get angry. The ones that they knew they could get whatever, they got pumped with a certain level of information. And the ones that they knew would only care about the price of eggs, they pumped with entirely different information. I don't think people grasp. Here's a challenge to you. I want
Mhm.
you to, to everyone who's watching tomorrow, the next day, whenever, next time you are hanging out with friends, I want you all to open Instagram and Facebook at the same time and scroll through it. I want you to see how different every single person that you know, the information that they're seeing. And it's not just because of who they're following. It's every little thing, every little movement that they made. None of you are seeing the same thing
You
because
can
it's created to cause confusion.
you can actually Google the exact same news story, and your
Absolutely.
top results will be wildly different depending upon the other things you've searched in the past as well.
I went to go visit some friends in Kentucky the other day that were doing an event. And it was my dear friend April A. Joy, who just wrote a book called Star Spangled Jesus. And while I was on the way there was this beautiful castle. And I was on the phone with my wife, Tashina, and I said, "Oh, you should Google this castle." And she goes, "Oh, well, it looks just like this castle." And I said, "No, it doesn't." And I Googled it, and even though we both Googled the exact same thing,
Yeah.
there aren't like a gazillion castles in Kentucky, by the way, but it still pulled
I
up
would imagine
entirely.
not.
There's not a plethora of them,
Yeah.
but it pulled up entirely different information. Even though we're in the same household and share very similar ideas, beliefs, and ways that we move throughout the world, and so just as a social experiment, I challenge folks to do that because I think you will begin to understand. Um, how we got here
Yeah.
is that everyone has been given an individualized AI created plan for rage, for
Yeah.
calm, for caring about eggs and milk and this or that, or even the things that you are fighting for, the things that you feel are just. That has been
Yeah.
programmed for you.
That's it. So, you and I have made a few pop culture references already in this video. I tend to do a lot of my videos are actually about looking at the spirituality behind a lot of the pop culture. And I've noticed in your published works, you tend to do a lot of the same thing. So, why do you think it's so vital that we use those pop culture references to get our message across?
Because we've always done that. Right? I mean, that is how we communicate. We communicate. Liturgy, for example, is just a repetition. Right? The Lord be with
Right.
you, and with thy spirit. The force is with you.
Yeah.
Live long and prosper. Like all of these things that we do. Right? Like all of them. It's liturgy. It's that we find commonality. You walk into a room and you say, "My name is Amigo Montoya," and then everyone starts quoting the movie back. Like that's liturgy. That is how we find our people, our culture, our community, right?
Yeah.
And when we do that, it makes a difference. It gives us an instant feeling of connection and connectivity, right? And so
It's
I think.
modern mythology.
Right. Well, and Jesus did it, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was arguing that Jesus cursed a lot in the Bible, and someone said that wasn't true. And I said he called people a brood of vipers.
Yeah.
That was a common curse at that time. It was not polite. It was not being polite.
No.
It's just we've lost the context for it. And so again, when I write on theology, for example, I will list the original verse and then update it with something that would be
Yeah.
relevant to our culture, so that people can see how they were actually talking to each other.
Yeah.
And we see that even the old hymns were spiritual lyrics pasted on top of bar song, right?
Right.
And
Because it's
so
it's melody everyone knew. Right.
right, and so they wanted, when people walked into the spiritual space, that they understood, right?
Right.
And so even things like the Roman Catholic Church holding on to Latin for as long as it did, people look at that as this draconian thing, but what they were trying to do, and failed, was they were trying to create this universal language so that no matter where you walked into the church anywhere in the world, that you would understand what was happening.
Yeah.
and
When I
and I'm
was
not
a
saying that they did it well, but the whole point was understanding, right? Like
yeah.
I think in a spiritual sense, what we have been doing is spending centuries trying to undo Babel.
In a lot of ways, I almost feel like the internet has succeeded where Babel failed in a lot of
Oh,
ways.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that from a cultural perspective, I think the reason that making things relevant is, I think that's actually where modern evangelicalism has succeeded so profoundly, right?
Mhm.
Is that they um, I've argued this a lot with even Trump. People are like, "Oh, he's not smart." I said, "I don't know. I think he's just learning how to talk in a way that people could hear him."
Right.
And I think that's what we, in many ways, have lost, is the ability to speak in a way that people can hear.
Yeah.
And pop culture is such a great way to do that, because then you can go, you get it, the thing, the joke, the reference, and it can become exciting, and we have an instant uh, connecting point, and it's a beautiful thing, and it helps that I'm a nerd and I like to watch all of these things anyways. And so I used to have to try really hard, and failed more often than not. Even when I was preaching in the Orthodox Church, those types of references would constantly slip in, and I would end up in the bishop's office, which is way scarier than the principal's office, by the way.
I can imagine. I have been summoned by a high priestess or two down to have a short talk. So I
Hmm, hmm.
absolutely understand where you're coming from. Um, Speaking of the Orthodox Church, one of the things that I've because I've been to a few Orthodox masses, and one of the things I actually loved was they still use like the classical candles. They do
Hmm.
their own incense. A lot of those traditional tools, and as I'm teaching new witches now, they ask, why are we still using incense? And I go, because it's a connection to a scent memory
Right.
of those rituals that have come before. Do you feel the same way about those kind of classical components, that it kind of binds everything together? It gives you a sense memory of what you're expecting from a sermon or a ritual or what have you.
Absolutely. The Orthodox Church took an entirely different approach than Rome did. Rome was very, everyone needs to speak the same language or they won't understand, right? The Orthodox Church took an entirely different stance. It was very, very important to them to make sure that everything was in the vernacular of the culture in which you were present, right? And so if you were in a Greek church, it was Greek. If you were in a Serbian church, it was Serbian. Like, if you, wherever you were, it was in your language, right? And
Right.
the sermon was in your language, and songs were in your language. When they first came into what later became Russia, they did not have a written language, and so Saint Kirill literally created the Cyrillic text so that
Right.
there would be a way for people to understand in their words. What they did differently so that people would still understand things is, you had a specific instance for a funeral. and a specific incense for a wedding, and a specific incense for this, and the right colors for this season and whatever. So when you walked into the church, wherever you were in the world, you knew what was going on. You walked in, you would smell the church and go, it's a funeral.
Right.
You'd walk in and you would see the way that the candles were set, or that the icon of the cross has been laid down. Oh, we're in Holy Week, like all of these, like it was the exterior symbols and smells and tastes that let people know that they were home. And in that sense, it's why I grieve so much, having lost the church, because I think we all can share in that grief as we've been cut off at different times from friends and family. Is what we end up talking about is missing those smells.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think in that way, it is those smells, those feelings, the taste of the bread, the feasts and the fasts, and the liturgical calendar, and knowing where you were, and all of those things. Those types of traditions, I think, have such a tremendous value. They can inform us into who we are. I miss it. I do.
I can understand that. And, I have such respect for the stand you took, and in a lot of ways choosing to leave because of the untenable situation you were forced into. It's an absolute challenge when the bureaucracy of your faith and your morals come into question, and the decision you have to make. And I often think about those heroes from myth and, of course, from the Christian Bible, that were forced into those decisions, right? And we even see in, like, the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus knew what the plan was supposed to be,
Right.
but he didn't necessarily want to do it. And he was looking for a way out, but he knew what the path he had to take was, right? And that's, I think, one of actually the great things about mythology is we can find those moments, those individuals in the mythology where we can say, these guys had a really challenging task too, right? They had a burden on their shoulders that was beyond what they thought they could stand, but they made the hard choice. And by making the hard choice, they found a deeper level of spirituality within, even if without, it didn't appear to the community as such, right? And I think that's a wonderful place to make it to, in a lot of ways, where you can stand and do that. I actually had some pretty rough spots that were very similar to your journey, where there were covens I was part of that had me make calls that would have made me either not be the person I am to conform, or to decide to go out on my own and, for lack of a better term, be out there eating honey and locusts for a little while, until somebody realized, hey, this guy actually was following the right path long term, and other communities would pick me up. So I feel it, and it's hard, but I also feel like even if they have disconnected you from that, to you doesn't mean that you necessarily have to give those things up. In your own personal ministry now, what mnemonic devices like that do you still choose to use?
Well, that's a great question. So there's a couple of different things that I've retained. And if you don't mind, while I share this story, I'm going to throw some more wood over here on the fire, because I promised my children that I would not allow this to die just because I was sitting here having a conversation with a bunch of other people. So we're going to just put a little wood on the fire, and that way I get to keep all of my promises. Um,
Well, it means that we're just having a campfire chat, the two of us, and I think
that's
that's a
exactly
wonderful
what
thing.
that's exactly what we're doing. So, um, I remember I was having a great struggle when I was still serving as a priest. Every year, the priests are required to take a retreat, which is not a vacation. It sounds like it would be. You go to a monastery, you make your confession,
Hmm.
you 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 get to be served by the the higher monks, the priest monks there, and um, but it's supposed to be a time of spiritual reflection. And this particular monastery that I was at was also open to the public,
Right.
and it was this little place in Alabama. It's called the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. It happens to be a Roman Catholic monastery, but it was where I took my retreat that year. And I remember, when you pull in there, it feels like you accidentally took a wrong turn in the middle of bumfuck nowhere and ended up in Rome, and you're not
Right.
exactly sure how that happened, right? And it's a wild place. I mean, there's literally knights riding around on horses, and this is not cosplay, mind you. I
No,
mean,
this is their duty.
they are in a whole other world where these knights are protecting the chastity of these nuns in case the place were ever like. I mean, they are just living in an entirely different world. And so a lot of people make pilgrimages there. And so I remember I walked into the main sanctuary, uh, and I was sitting there, and the nuns there are cloistered. So even during the liturgy, they're behind a screen, right? They're
Right.
not out there with the laity, and they were rehearsing for mass. And I was in there by myself. And and there was still incense floating around, and this woman, older woman. I was a very young priest, so I don't. She was probably my age now, but it came and sat next to me, and I was just struggling so deeply with my faith at that moment. Um, and she said, "Father, you should pray." And I said something that you're not supposed to say, especially to the laity. And I said, "I'm not sure that he's listening to me right now."
Okay.
And she reached into her purse and she pulled out a rosary. She put it in my hand and she goes, "Then ask his mother. He always listens to his mother." And not only did that fundamentally shift and form my Marian theology, and really make me think uh, about what a significant and spiritual role she plays, and why that role has been, diminished in so many ways throughout Christendom. But I still pray the rosary. Um, I have a lot of problems right now with a lot of things. But my house is adorned in iconography. Um, all of my old chalices are still here. Um, but I have said, and I mean it, that I don't intend to ever ascend the altar again
Okay.
until everyone is welcome at the table. And so, if that day ever comes, uh, I'll be ready. I'll be rusty, but I'll be ready. Um, but I also have written a letter making it very, very clear that that will likely come after my lifetime. And if any of those sons of bitches try and put a halo on my head and illuminate me in an icon, I don't want it.
That's
Nothing I
fair.
have done is saintly. Um, what I did was the most basic right thing to do.
That's it.
And I don't think anyone should be rewarded for doing the basic most right thing. And my goodness is only called goodness in comparison to the grotesque evil that I was walking away from. And I don't think that deserves any greater reward than that just I'm a man who tried and fails often.
Well, as one man who has managed to turn failing upwards into an art form to another, you are always welcome at our table.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that's the thing is, I still do weddings, still do funerals when I'm asked, because I don't think that someone should be deprived of those things because the church of their youth is rejecting them. So in those senses, I still serve in as much as I am able. And so in that way, like there was an LGBTQ church that, or the majority of the congregation were, and they lost their pastor very suddenly, and they asked me to fill in, so I did, and so of course I served communion. So in that sense, I do want to make it clear what I mean is I'm never going to recant. And the things that I would have to say that I am sorry for in order to ever stand behind the altar of an Orthodox church again.
It is.
I'll never say I'm sorry for those things. I will never say I'm sorry for validating people's love. I will never say that I am sorry for illegally doing the funeral for a woman who had a miscarriage of her twins at 8 months, and no priest would do it because though they were pro-life, somehow that didn't count as life. I'll never apologize. No. But I broke the law. I broke canon law. I did it anyway. I did it after my suspension. So I'm fully aware that I have broken the law. And therefore, I will have to apologize. I just don't agree with the law. And I think in 2013, what I had to do is I looked out the door of the church and Jesus was walking out the door. And I had to ask myself what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. Do I stay in the church that I believe that he built? Or do I follow him into the strip clubs and into the bars?
And the dark places where you're needed.
And the dark places and the border and all of those places. Where I think I maybe... I had this conversation recently with Stormy Daniels.
Right.
And I said, I think the thing that people hate the most about me is that as much as we are friends, if that man ever repented, I would be the first one there to try and talk to him and show him the way to undo all of the things that he has done. And in that sense, I understand that that is a polarizing thought. But you know what? She looked at me and she said, I'd be on the plane with you.
Yeah.
And she's a witch. Yeah. And I am a priest, And so what can you do? I think that loving people radically means that sometimes we yell at them. Sometimes we clash on the picket line. Sometimes it's getting arrested at the border, standing in between families who are being ripped apart. All of those things might come. But radically loving people is also going to look like, how do we put all of this together when they realize how much of a failure this idea was, and that this idea has failed every single time we have tried it, from Rome to Russia to the Third Reich. It is always a failure of an idea.
That's it.
But what do we get different on the other side of this time? What do we learn? What do we learn and not repeat of history that makes it so that it's never appealing again?
I've tried to explain to people that at the end of the day, no force on this planet has been able to maintain order through force of arms alone. It has to be a choice of the society by the people to maintain
Sure.
a social order. And you know, you and I have sat down and done our history and learned it. And you know, sometimes even if it takes, you know, years, we'll sit down and teach it again and keep teaching it until, you know, the societies involved learn those lessons and try to maintain them. And the good news is, historically, those people who have gone through the hardest of learning those lessons do eventually get it and wind up building freer societies. So
Absolutely.
while we live in a while we potentially live in a darker point in history, the truth of the matter always is, eventually the light does triumph on those, and they build better worlds because of it.
You know,
And
as a millennial, and you know, I look at my life and how little of it I've really gotten to live, because my high school experience was taken over by the catastrophe of Columbine,
right,
and then you know, we had 9/11, which took away the ability to travel freely, and all of the things that I had planned for my life keep being consumed by this greed in our society, this want for more and more and more, and it gets taken away from each of us. I'm not just talking about me when I say these things. I'm talking about a generational
yeah,
hurt that has happened, and I think it will take us becoming antiquity before people really pick apart all of the ways that our lives were genuinely stolen from us, and any marginalization you tack on to that, it's times 1,000, right? You know,
right.
and you know, a trans person has had to fight, you know, a million times more hard just to be able to live and move in this space. You know, and and what I'm trying to say is, I said to a friend recently, I said, I wonder, not that I know, not I said, I wonder, is it possible that some generations are just made to be the compost for the flowers of the future? And and so, you know, people ask me if I have hope still, and I do. That may seem inexplicable after a week like last week, and I understand why a lot of people don't feel hope. Um, I also understand, as a white guy sitting next to a fireplace, I probably, um, what the fuck do I know?
Right.
But at the same time, um, I do have hope, but I don't know that I'll see all of the things that I hope for. But I have hope that history has taught us that we go through these horrible things as a society, and I don't say this in any way to diminish them. They're awful. I mean, there's an entire generation that has been lost in Palestine right now, and
Mhm.
I
On
grieve
both
over
sides
that.
of the equation.
I grieve that every single day. Uh, but at the same time, um, I have hope that those children, and it should not have been their responsibility, but somehow it has
No.
become. They will turn that rubble into statues and paint and guitars and drums and buildings and monuments. And the truth is that 1,000 years from now, another generation won't appreciate them anymore, and they'll blow them all up. And I don't know what that means, but
Well,
I just know that it's true.
m-
Like,
if I might offer you something,
of course.
one of the core beliefs or core practices in Wicca is something called the Wiccan Read,
Mm.
and it's basically our core tenets put to rhyme. And one of the most important lines in it is that we must remember that to learn one must suffer, and that and we've taken that to mean modernly that, you don't learn the hard lessons by sitting on your couch. You learn the hard lessons by standing up and being counted and taking your wounds and learning those lessons and moving forward again. And I think as a society, we can kind of point to that, where when we fail to learn from our past, when we fail to remember the things that our generations before us had to go through, we have to learn that lesson again. And unfortunately, the only way humans truly hold on to lessons is through pain. And one of the common questions I get asked all the time is, well, if the gods are good, then why do they put us through this stuff? And it's because we still have lessons to learn. We still have important pieces of ourself that we have to build, and we don't build those through comfort, we build them through hardship. And because of that, be afraid of the day when you don't have those hard lessons to learn anymore, because that means you've got nothing left to do. Be thankful for the hard lessons when they come. They suck, but sometimes you have to embrace the suck in order to grow as a person. And to me, it always seems like those people who have been through it, the people that have developed that 1,000-mile stare, are some of the most compassionate and generous of spirit people you will ever meet. And it's because they had to go through it to get to there. So while it sucks, I explained to some people that were having trouble with the concept of trans that transition is a crucible. It burns away everything that isn't important and puts the person to their most pure, their most original form. But that burning away process sucks, and it's painful, and it's hard. But if they can make it through, if they can survive that process of that pain, they wind up becoming some of the most genuine people to themselves that they have ever been before. While they're choosing, while they're living the hard, it's not really a choice, but while they're living that hard road to hoe, what comes out of it is beautiful in ways that we can only hope to achieve. So, I think you and I can both agree that anybody who's going through it, we are, people like the two of us are going to be there to help, are going to be there to advise, to pass on the hard-earned wisdom we've learned, and hopefully get you through it so that you get that opportunity to become that person you were always meant to be. Right? That person who's been through, who's learned those hard lessons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you and I have chosen our own version of that hard road by being that person that other people could rely on when they needed it. And I think it's, even though we've had our missteps and had our tumbles, we've gotten up and been stronger about it, which we've just applied to helping more people.
Sure. And I do hear you. And as I'm processing these thoughts, I've pondered on the question many times of would I be the same person that I am today if I hadn't gone through some of the things that I've gone through. But then along this journey, I've met people who've gotten to the same conclusion, who grew up with far greater privilege than I had. They didn't grow up in poverty. They didn't experience homelessness. They didn't ever experience hunger. And they came to the same conclusion somehow. And I would never in any way say, anything about, your own faith experience or how you view the world. For me, where I struggle, because if you remember, I grew up in Pentecostalism, and I don't know that there's all that fundamentally different between Pentecostalism and and Wicca in many ways. I mean, you have prophets, you have seers, you have healing, you have
Right.
there's so many components. And one of the things that we were taught growing up in the Pentecostal church was a very similar principle on the idea of pain as a formation, that we are purified through fire. I think where I struggle with that principle as I have gotten older and as I've seen the
Right.
world, is I think we have to learn somehow how to differentiate maybe individual struggle, which is what I believe that you're talking about, right? You're talking about that individual one-on-one struggle and then community-wide struggle, right? Because
Hmm.
if we're not careful, and again, I want to make it so abundantly clear that
Right.
I am not saying that this is what you are saying, but if we're not careful, then how that can become translated and how it became translated in the churches that I grew up in is that certain atrocities throughout time
Yeah, and
were
that's
necessary for growth. And so balancing those things out, I do think that there are individual things. I understand hunger because I have been hungry, right?
right.
And so when I see someone who's hungry, I have an instant empathy, an instant compassion. And it's not empathy, it's sympathy. I know what hunger looks like. Someone doesn't have to tell me. I can look on someone's face, right? And so I've done little things over the course of my life. I know what it's like. I remember standing in line with my mother at Walmart and watching someone get, and her debit card not work, and I have to put those groceries back. So I've stood in line and watched that happen to other people, and I've just said, put it on mine.
Yeah.
And I do those things not because I'm good. I do those things because I know
Yeah, we've been
what the
through it.
fuck it feels like, and
Right. Yeah.
I don't want them to feel that, and I don't want to watch it. I think that's why I keep saying I'm not as good as people think I am. I don't want to watch it. Does that make sense?
I
I
mean, to
don't
me,
want. I don't want to
it's
see
kind of
it.
like,
I don't want to. Like I don't want
it's
to go
almost an
through that
enlightened
again.
self-interest, right? Like,
Right.
like the
People.
byproduct is I've helped a bunch of people, but the actual motivation was I just don't want to. I just don't want to see the suffering in my
Right.
world.
I don't want to see that. Because all I can see is my mom
Right.
and her taking the Haagen Dazs that she promised me out of the bag, and she's pulling everything out because she's trying to do math on how many things she can pull out to still get food to the house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I
Yep.
don't want to see that. Because I can't. I'm not seeing that person in front of me. I'm just watching my childhood over and over and over again. I'm gonna fucking swipe that card because I don't want to go back there. That's goddamn cheaper than therapy. I fucking promise you. And so
Right.
like, and
And
so like,
but
and
if
so
the
how much of our altruism is selfishness? I don't know.
well, I look at it this way, in a weird way, and this is going to sound weird, okay?
I'm all about weird.
But does it particularly matter whether we're doing the right thing
Oh
because we
no,
simply don't
I
want to
don't
see
think it.
suffering
No,
in our little world, or
no,
because we're doing it because we simply believe in something higher, right? I
no.
don't
I don't think it
necessarily know
does.
that it does,
Well,
right?
I would be well, because but maybe it does, because
Well,
maybe what I did is the exact reason why some people voted for lower prices of eggs. So I don't know.
there we
You know
go,
what I mean? Like I don't know. And
right?
so maybe it does matter. Maybe I should only do things because I love that person. And I guess that in lies the struggle. That's why I kind of I'm pushing back ever so slightly because because I know your heart. I can hear your heart in what you're saying, and I don't want somebody to watch us having this conversation and walk away and
Absolutely.
go, and the Jews went through the Holocaust, and the Africans went through slavery,
Yeah, no,
and all
that's
the that's not, I don't think. I just want to make it
this
so
is a
abundantly clear
personal
because
piece.
this is
Yeah,
and in that sense, sure. I burned
yeah,
my hand on the stove, right? And I
that's
learned to
it.
stop putting my fucking hand on the stove. But I guess what I do wonder, and I don't know how you view the afterlife, right? But if the
Right.
afterlife is anything like what I would hope it would be, what I hope the afterlife would be, is that there isn't hell waiting for any of us. And I know that will make a lot of people mad, but
No,
follow
I,
me
I
through.
agree.
I hope there's not a hell waiting for any of us. Um, and at least for me, um, there's a lot of people that I didn't get to have dinners with because they were taken too soon, and I'd like to have dinner with them again, and I would like to see and experience things. I'd like to watch my life on the big screen TV in the sky and see the things that I fucked up and how I could have done them better. And maybe that's a purgation. Maybe that is a little bit of suffering, but in the same way, um, I hope that there is a time of rest and no more tears and no more pain because I'm very tired. Um, and so that's why I say I don't know. Not that I
Yeah.
say that you're wrong. It's that I don't know because I would like to walk a day uh, where my back doesn't hurt, and when I pee, I'm done the very first time, and my and and I just when I think I fixed the last tooth, the next one starts hurting, and I miss being able to
Yeah.
be on the podcast the first time, and all of those. I'd love it.
You know, we
I'd love a
we
day
had,
without
so
those
for those
things.
at home, we had the most amazing scheduling snafus trying to put this together. But I am so glad we got to have this conversation.
Well, I
Um,
think it's better that we had it after the election because um, we would have had a very different conversation.
yeah.
And I think this one's more important.
Yeah, I think this one needed to happen in all the right ways.
And so is that gone? Did I get a tooth infection so that we would be late? I don't know. And that I think is you're watching me have to process in
Right.
real time. I don't know that anyone's ever caught this on video. This is what I'm doing in my room as I'm writing. Is I'm writing and then I read it and I go, I don't know that I really think that, or I don't know that I want somebody to walk away thinking that that's what I
Yeah.
said. I know that I mean it this way, but could they take it?
Could they take it a different way?
This is the crazy making that happens in my brain, and I have enough diagnoses that I can say crazy. So.
Well, listen, whenever you're describing yourself, I figure any language you choose to use about yourself is your business, right? I mean, I think that's how it should be, right? If you're
I hope.
comfortable, go with it, right?
How are you?
Me?
How are you?
Well, I'm up in Canada, so our election is coming
Yeah,
up. We're
but
watching what's going on down there.
I'm reading the comments from a lot of Canadians. Y'all have to be a little bit afraid that your
Yeah.
little cousin to the south of you has maybe
Yeah,
not
I
worn a
mean,
mask and is coughing up your way,
well,
like
to me, the way I'm looking at it is this is so one of the things that I've loved about my time in craft, because I started in the 90s when, while it wasn't necessarily popular, it was accepted, right? They
right,
didn't have to hide. Watching the call of my brothers in the US, we have kind of a code phrase, if you will. Stay secret, stay safe is kind of the general
mm,
code for, go to ground, don't
right,
advertise, right?
right,
Find a local church that is accepted, and go there and pay lip service if you need to, whatever it is to avoid suspicion.
right,
I never thought in my lifetime
mm,
I would see that code being called. I never thought in my lifetime, because I'm very fortunate to have been um, made part of the New Wiccan Church Canada as their vice president. I'm basically we act as like a translating body between the way we do things and the way the government acts.
okay,
And I've been seeing a lot of requests from people to come up on visas on religious grounds because they're terrified of what's coming.
yeah,
And watching that for the first time has been very, very shocking. And
yeah,
all I can think of is I will take the time I need to figure out where I'm at once I know my brothers and sisters are safe,
Yeah.
once I know that they're in a place that they don't have to worry about looking over their shoulder. Because if they are in that kind of crisis, the least I can do is stand up and act. The least I can do is be available to them as a counsel, as a friend, or, use my position to try to, encourage government bodies to bring these people up who feel they're in legitimate danger. That's what I can do. And I'm going to keep doing that. And I'm going to keep on here spreading a message of compassion and tolerance for everybody. That I'm going to keep standing here and being that guy because, I am in a position that allows me to do that. And
Mm.
for somebody who has been offered much, much should be asked. So, yeah, I'm going to use that time I've got. I'm going to use the advantages I've got to help those people that need it the absolute most right now. And I never thought I would be in that position. I'll be honest with you, when I took the position, first they had to vote me in because I desperately tried to get other people to take the job.
Mm.
But they put me in that position, and I would be remiss if I didn't use that to help people, use that to help anyone that I possibly could. And maybe, just maybe, if I shout long enough at the clouds, somebody else will hear it and decide, you know what? That's a path forward I can take. And maybe enough people will eventually join in. But even if they don't, I know that I've been using everything that I've been offered to do that. So to me, it's, I guess I'm feeling the burden, but in a lot of ways, I'm so glad the burden fell on me because I know what to do with that. Right.
Right.
And that's where I'm at right now is, okay, you know what? I gotta help people because that's what I know how to do. Right. My first career is in IT because I got to help people. Right. Everyone gets mad at their computer, but if I fix their computer, they're just a little happier that day. Right.
Right.
And doing this, yeah, if I have to yell, if I have to scream, if I have to stand up and go, guys, come on, we got to do the right thing here. Even if it's the hard thing, we have to do it. And if that's what I'm called to do, then I'm glad to do it. And you know what? Until I'm called to do otherwise, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep being that guy, yelling at the top of his lungs into the internet to everybody be, at least a little bit more compassionate to each other than you were yesterday. Even if that's, not always picked up by everyone, even if I wind up losing subscribers or whatever over it, to me, it's worth it. And I'm grateful that I have that opportunity. And thank goodness, Providence, fate, whatever you want to call it, that other people saw this is the kind of guy that we want doing that, right? We're willing to let him stand up front and do it because, it's going to sound weird, but the thought of somebody else having to do that when I could now is just horrifying. In British traditional Wicca, there's more than just the priest and priestess that run the temple responsibilities. One of those jobs is called the summoner. Now, in ancient times, what they did was they would walk from village to village and let everybody know that a ritual was happening and where and when and so forth.
Right.
I did that job for years as my responsibility in temple before I became priesthood, and even a little afterward because nobody else could take on the role. So that urge to defend others, which is also part of the role, is, defend the members who may not be able to be out there and speak for them, and also, be a bit of a medic and what have you too, is deeply baked into my being. So, in a lot of ways, I feel like in an odd way, fate decided to groom me for this role.
Sure.
That If the worst should happen and they needed somebody to stand up and be that person that says, okay, you know what? No. In this weird way, I'm living that life now. In this weird
Yeah.
way, I'm that guy. And when you're in that role, you hope, like you wouldn't believe, that you never actually have to be that guy.
Oh,
You
sure.
prepare for it all day and hope you never actually have to do it. But here I am doing it. And I'm doing okay with it. It's one of those, it's hard, but it's necessary. And I'm so thankful that other people don't have to be that guy. Other people don't have to get the hate mail. Other people don't
Right.
have to have, arguments with local leaders about what is acceptable and isn't acceptable for the evangelicals to try to rally against, right?
Mm.
What does constitute a hate crime up here and what doesn't, and why would you allow this sort of thing? And even the hardest one is actually talking to other faith leaders around here
Mm.
and making them aware, listen, because this other person is the loudmouth and you don't say anything, everyone assumes that you're with that guy. Everyone is going to say, if you're, like, as an example, we had a Durham Pagan Pride Day up here recently, where we got together and we had workshops and dancing and singing and getting together as a community and just enjoying each other's company. And we got our equivalent of the Westboro Baptist Church showing up and protesting it.
Sure.
And having the hard conversation with the other churches in the area saying, guys, if you don't stand up against them, your people are going to assume you're with them.
Yeah.
Our people are assuming you're with them and they're afraid of you now. Do you want that to be the message that you send out? And it's a hard conversation because they're like, well, they're not part of our thing. So what do you do? And I'm like, what do I do? Is I keep my people safe. What are you doing?
Right.
Right. So that's kind of where I'm at. And that's what I'm dealing with. But
Well,
again,
I think you're doing important work. And
thank you.
And in that sense of what you just said about the other churches and all of that, I know that there's a long history of people from my profession doing some very unkind things to people from yours, and for whatever value it has, coming from a suspended priest of the Orthodox Church, I'm very sorry that we have not had these types of conversations, and that we've seen each other, and that we've listened to each other and learned to love each other. And in that sense, maybe what we can take away from today is maybe there would have been a time in the 13th century that no one could have imagined, the two of us sitting and having this conversation. In that sense, we are the hope of some past generation. And so that is why I have hope for the future ones.
Absolutely. I think this is the perfect spot to end this off right now. Now, on my channel, we have a little bit of a blessing that we use when we end off. And if you wish, and you recognize a little bit of it, feel free to join in.
Thank you.
Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.